Hello, everybody. This is Glenn Loury, The Glenn Show. This week's post at The Glenn Show is a cross-posting of a conversation that I had with Hamish McKenzie. Hamish is a co-founder of the Substack enterprise and has recently launched his own podcast where he invited me as a guest and we engaged in conversation. So here we are. Please do enjoy it. It's lively and interesting, as is Hamish McKenzie, an interesting fellow. It's the Substack family here at The Glenn Show this week.
Well, Glenn Loury, thank you very much for agreeing to do this interview with me. We're sitting in a pretty kick-ass studio here in the Manhattan Institute in New York. The clue's in the name. I wanted to start by asking you, you're a very esteemed academic. You could be sitting in the ivory tower and isolating yourself there. But as well as doing that, you post video podcasts to the internet, conversations with a wide variety of people.
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
Well, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot more interesting than the dull, dry, specialized, arcane, parsing, dotting I's and crossing T's as economic theorist, although I have great respect for my colleagues who do that kind of work. I'm in my 70s. I don't have anything to prove. If I got something to say, I get to say it, and I get to say it and people react, and that's gratifying. So, at this stage in my career, I'm kind of letting my hair down a little bit and sitting back and taking it all in and, letting my voice be heard. And it's a lot of fun.
And what does this give you that academia can't give you?
Thousands of followers. I can make an income by doing what I love, which I was doing, of course, when I'm teaching and when I'm writing academic work. But I somehow feel that the sky is the limit here, that I can reach a broader range of people. I can have influence beyond the fraternity, the academic fraternity, things that I really care about. So I talk a lot about race and racial inequality and racial justice and so on. And these are things that I care about, and I think I could maybe move the needle a little bit with my contributions. My chairman of the economics department at Brown University asked me for my annual report. We are obliged to, write a memo explaining ourselves. What have we accomplished and what have we done? And I hadn't published a single word in an academic journal in the whole year, and I didn't know what I would say. So instead, I just posted to him the summary of the work that I've done at glennloury.substack. The essays that I've put up, the excerpts from the podcast that I've published there, and so forth and so on, and mailed it over to him. And he said, "Wow, that's so impressive. You're reaching 10 times as many people and all of that." So I did get a little bit of credit, but I think they're also giving me leeway because I'm an old geezer and nobody's really expecting me to be pushing the frontier anymore.
Is everyone at the economics department at Brown now going to start a podcast?
I think everyone who could do it well will be motivated to consider it. My colleague Emily Oster has moved in this direction with her kind of stuff that she's been doing very effectively, I think. She's smart and she's got a lot of interesting things to say. So that's one example.
How did you get into being a I don't know. How do you describe yourself? A video podcaster, a conversationalist, a vlogger? Like, what is this thing that you're doing?
I don't know. Video podcaster seems to work pretty well.
Yeah.
How did I get into this? Well, I have to thank Robert Wright, Bob Wright of bloggingheads.tv, who's the proprietor and originator of that suite of podcast where the Glenn Show had its origins back in 2008. Every 2 or 3 times a month, I guess I'd put up new content there, and there's a community, and my contributions were well received by the Blogging Heads audience, and did that for years. And John McWhorter, my conversation partner, and I initiated our now nearly 15-year conversation at Bob's platform at Blogging Heads. That's how I got into it, and found that I liked it, that it was relatively easy to do, and that it gave me an outlet. I see a book that I think is interesting. I call up the author and I say, hey, you want to talk about your book? Something is happening in politics or in the culture that I am, stimulated by. I have a platform and I can take those issues up publicly.
And one of the things about Blogging Heads, if I remember correctly, is that it encourages sort of productive arguments and conversations with people who are not necessarily sharing your political positions.
Yeah, I think that was Bob's, business plan or his vision. It would be, people who had disagreements but were modeling in their conversation how to agreeably engage with one another, even though they took different sides of the issue. He and Mickey Kaus were the prototypical pair. John McWhorter and I are also in our way doing a similar thing. He's, a New Yorker and a liberal Democrat, although I don't know if he confessed to that, and I'm not.
Right. That seems to be kind of something that is in shorter supply on the modern internet than it was in the sort of the heydays of blogging when you first started doing Blogging Heads TV. Does that sound like a fair statement?
That may be right. I'm beyond looking at my own stuff. I don't perhaps spend enough time on social media to have an informed opinion about what the trends are, but that sounds consistent with what I'm hearing.
As you've been doing this work, as you've been broadcasting and publishing on the internet over the last 15 years or so, have there been any sort of changes in the culture that have become evident to you?
Well, it's certainly grown. I mean, there's just a lot more action, it seems to me. Everybody's got a podcast. My wife, my lovely wife, I always refer to her as my lovely wife because she is lovely, Lawan Loury, is a podcast addict. She's got like a dozen people that she's following when she's cooking or, just puttering around in the house. She's got a tablet and she's got one of these or another of these correspondents whom she enjoys. That's how she gets her information. She doesn't trust mainstream media. So I don't think she's alone. I think there are a lot of people. I gather from the comments that I'm getting back from viewers of The Glenn Show that there are a lot of people who spend a fair amount of time consuming this kind of product. So I think it's become more ubiquitous, more widespread as a medium. But in terms of the texture, the character of what's available, I don't feel well informed enough to have a sense of what's happened over the last 10 years. I'm sure there's an interesting story to tell there.
Wow, that sounds like a position of sort of blissful unawareness, maybe.
Something like that, of being 74 years old.
You're not sort of participating in the culture wars on Twitter or on social media by the sounds of things, but sometimes the culture wars come to you, and you must notice that. For instance, if Amy Wax comes on your shows and says something provocative about race, and then the internet explodes in outrage, how do you notice that?
Well, I get copied on some of the posts at Twitter, and I get notification, and I'll look. Mainly, though, it's through the comments that are being contributed at Substack and at YouTube to the podcast posts that I put up. I read those comments pretty faithfully, and it takes time, but I want to have some sense of how people are experiencing what it is that I'm putting out there. And in that way, I get a sense of, the nature of the controversy. But, when people say there's a fierce battle on Twitter about this or that Twitter is now driving the behavior of journalists, and in a way, I kind of don't know what they're talking about, because it's kind of mysterious to me. Why? I look at my phone, some idiot has, who is anonymous, I don't know who it is, has called me a name, or has, why should I care?
You've been called a lot of names in your history as a public intellectual and academic, and you've been hated by the right, and you've been hated by the left, and you've been loved by the left, and you've been loved by the right at different times, and depending on different positions you've taken.
Yeah.
Is there anything different about it when it comes in the time of social media than what it was like before social media?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. Let me see if I can say what it is. For speed of reaction, it's instantaneous. I don't know. I'm just kind of coasting along here. But you are right. I've been left. I've been right. As you say, hated. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe that's too strong a term, but you've definitely been strongly criticized by different sides at different times.
You learn a lot more quickly and more extensively about the fact that you said something that people didn't like. Okay, so the Amy Wax thing, or Sam Harris made a comment about suppressing the Hunter Biden laptop story, and then I made a comment about Sam Harris, and John McWhorter and I kicked that around, and I took exception to what I understood Sam to say, but I didn't quite get right what he had said. But, and my apologies, Sam, if you hear this, because I do like you.
We'll make sure he hears it.
But that, a little bit of a firestorm of controversy. So I'm looking at the comments, and there's some people who are on my side, right on. And there's some people who are on Sam's side. Glenn didn't treat him fairly and whatnot. And I'm aware of that instantly. But I don't know. As I say, I'm kind of at a stage in my life where I'm pretty much doing my thing, and I'm relatively impervious to the fact that there are haters out there. Haters are going to hate.
Right. Does it ever cause you to rethink about what you might say, positions you might take, given the intensity of the blowback sometimes?
Well, yeah. During the 2020 election season, I had a formula, which was, I'm going to vote for Biden, but you shouldn't believe me, because if I were going to vote for Trump, I would never tell you. So if you ask me who I'm going to vote for, there's no information in my response. You ask me who I'm going to vote for, I'm going to vote for Biden. But you should have no change of your prior estimate who I'm voting from the fact that I said that, because there's really only one answer to that question. So where does Glenn stand on Trump? Because one of my points that I've been making over and over again in conversation with John McWhorter, who very forthrightly, as a good New Yorker, denounces Trump at every opportunity. He's a moron, he's an idiot, he's whatever, is that, hey, man, like 45% of the population think the guy's think he should be president. Maybe we ought to think about why they think that. Maybe we shouldn't reduce our reaction to Trump down to a personal evaluation of his character, and we should think a little bit more broadly about the structures of America. The tectonic plates is my metaphor, that are shifting under our feet in American culture and in politics, of which the ascendancy of Trump is one manifestation. And when we reduce our evaluation of this phenomenon to an assessment of his character, we're giving short shrift to the sentiments of those many, many millions who think that he is representing them. He's their tribune, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. That's as far as I would allow myself to go into the, oh, you're a Trump apologist world. Now, many people, some of them dear friends of mine, some of them I actually live with, are saying, why are you not more vociferously denouncing this monstrous imposition on American democracy? And I'm being invited, to perform. I mean, you got a platform. People follow you. People respect you, they say. And they do. Glenn, you're brilliant. Glenn, you should run for president. I get these kind of comments. Mm-hmm. You should be using your platform to denounce this gangster and thug and, moron and whatever. And I refuse to do it. But I do that cautiously. I mean, I am saying just as much as I dare say that's favorable to Trump. So, and I dare not say anything further, even if I think it. Mm-hmm. So, because that would be, maybe that would be the kiss of death. Maybe that would be, so I'm managing my brand, I must confess, by carefully selecting how it is that I react to the Trump phenomenon so as to be able to maintain plausible deniability.
Right. What gives you, well, I'll preface this with, you would get a lot of points if you did denounce Trump. In the circles that people like you and me sort of find ourselves in, the elite institutional circles and media, there's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And so you would get points for denouncing him. It's a hard position to take, even to sort of go for neutrality. What gives you the courage to not to stand up for the sort of the more neutral position, to stand up for the position where you don't sort of reflexively denounce Trump?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I appreciate that you think I'm courageous. Thank you. Where that character trait of mine comes from, I'm not sure I can say. I can report to you that I hate to be bullied. Don't tell me what to think and don't tell me what to say. So you want to call me a name. But if you want to change my mind, you had better make an argument. It had better be a good one, this kind of thing. So I don't like crowds. I don't like herds. I don't like to wave banners. I don't care that much for virtue signaling as a practice. I was a black Reaganite conservative in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. Okay, so,
Not a hugely popular position.
Yeah, that was very unpopular in a lot of quarters. I got denounced by my own children,
What did that feel like?
It felt really, really terrible, actually, because I said, look, I can, respect me enough to give me the latitude to think for myself. We don't have to agree, but that doesn't make me a bad person. And maybe you ought to stop and listen. There might be a certain amount of wisdom here after all these decades of life. I have reasons for taking the positions that I do. Maybe you ought to sit back and think about it. Don't be so arrogant. Don't think you know everything. You're not that smart. Kind of thing like that. But of course, I wouldn't say it like that. But it's all, it's all good. We're happily ensconced as, I have 5 children, 6 grandchildren, and, we get together with their spouses and whatnot every year on the Outer Banks, North Carolina, for a week of bonding and all of that. And, it's all good.
Is that a theme like that seems to commonly come up now in the sort of social media climate that I spend a lot of my time trying to escape but failing to escape? The idea that because you hold a politically different position, you must be somehow bad or morally wrong. Like, it's 45% of America would vote for Donald Trump to be the president.
Right.
And a lot of the response to that from the quarters where like I spend a lot of my time is that those 45% must be bad in some way. Same was happening to you with the discussions with your children about supporting Reagan. By the sounds of
way
things.
back. Yeah.
Is that just that a fact of life? Is it changing in any way?
Well, I think it's changing. Again, I don't have chapter and verse on that. I'm not an academic studying that in a systematic way. But I think we have become much more siloed and much more kind of divided into camps who have a hard time talking to one another. I was just reading Matt Taibbi's book, Hate, Inc., and I was very impressed by it. So far, I haven't quite finished, but I'm about halfway through.
First serialized on Substack and then turned into a paperback.
I have the paperback now. I didn't see it when he was putting these posts up, but he has an analysis there about the interaction between media and political aspirants and how things get framed and whatnot. And I think that the social media evolution factors into that, because it becomes very easy to, the algorithms, I suppose, of recommended things help, to just go to the sites and read the stuff that you want to read and talk to the people that you want to talk to who agree with you. And, then demonization of the other side follows pretty naturally. And, nuance suffers as a result.
Well, it's very difficult to do the opposite you've shown. Your own kids sort of were denouncing you or disagreeing with you at least, and it's hard to take the independent position, it seems like.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I've tried to have people on the show who challenge me, and my wife, LaJuan, my lovely wife, has encouraged me in this regard. Had Cornel West on the show, and we had a wonderful conversation. Mm-hmm. I've had Brianna Joy Gray on the show. Mm-hmm. I've had Richard Wolff, the Marxist economist, on the show. These are people that come at the issues that I'm concerned about rather differently than I do. Mm-hmm. But I'm proud to be able to say that I can have, cordial and productive conversations with them, and, I intend to do more of that.
So given your experience with political discourse over the decades, and given what you see happening now with social media and perhaps other aspects of publishing sort of intensifying tribalism, and given what you're experiencing when you have these kind of across the aisle conversations on the Glenn Show, what are you optimistic or pessimistic or somewhere in between when it comes to how discourse is going, how we might evolve as a culture?
Yeah, it's a big question. Maybe I'm going to say pessimistic because we are so polarized. To the point where large numbers of people question the outcome of elections. And that can go in both directions, by the way. I mean, Trump lost the most recent election for president, and he's a election denier and his followers to the extent that they don't acknowledge the legitimacy of Biden's election. But believe me, that's not over. There will be other elections. There will be different outcomes. And it's like the cat is out of the bag now on this. It becomes okay to, deny the legitimacy of the only process that we have for actually adjudicating these political disputes. So if you can't settle it within an institutional framework where everybody kind of accepts the rules, and when they win, great, and when they lose, well, too bad, but we'll carry on. If you can't do that, well, what's left? Gangs of thugs in the street banging away at each other, that kind of thing. Or as Matt Taibbi says, the person who disagrees with you has to be Hitler. Mm-hmm. There's nothing short of Hitler. So, and then if they're Hitler, well, anything you can do to defeat Hitler is legitimate, and that's worrying. That's very worrying. On the other hand, it is possible to have a conversation with just about anybody instantly and to send it out to millions of people, and that's really pretty cool. So I don't blame the medium for the fact that it can abet partisan polarization and division, because it can also facilitate a different kind of discourse. And there are actors here. Taibbi focuses on the commercial interests of the media. Political parties are also organizing, raising large amounts of money, using social media to raise the money to fund their candidates and their campaigns. And they have an interest in, the negative campaigning is the way to go now. So many people are doing it. And I assume negative campaigning is easier to do when you can put a message in everybody's email inbox to tell them about how horrible the world is coming to an end. The world will end tomorrow if you don't give me $14.
$14 standing between you and the end of democracy.
Yeah, exactly. And the same kind of thing coming from the other side. I mean, both sides are doing it. So I was at a conference recently, and I learned about the work of the organization called Braver Angels. Braver Angels is a nonprofit that tries to promote civil conversation across the partisan divide in political and cultural, difference. And I mean, literally getting people together for breakfast and, here's red, here's blue, and they actually get to see that the other side is not evil. They're not Hitler. They're just people who either do or do not affirm this position on abortion, that position on the Second Amendment, et cetera. Mm-hmm. It's run by a guy called David Blankenhorn. At least he was the founder. It's a national organization, and it's got a pretty good track record. And one of the things that they're doing is that they're encouraging debates where, high school kids are, they bone up and, the whole point is get the kid to take either side of the debate. You have to be effectively able to argue either side of the debate. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty good. I mean, that forces someone to actually consider, why is it that the person with whom I disagree holds the position that they hold? What are their arguments? I try to do that a little bit with the so-called steel manning function at my own podcast. When I hear an argument, I try to imagine and then articulate what I think the best case for the other side is. Mm-hmm. Ideally, if I do that well, the listener, if they tune in the middle of the podcast, won't know what side I actually hold. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that I can succeed at that, I'm hopefully modeling a kind of intellectual openness and a kind of, if you will, epistemic modesty, a kind of, this may be what I think, but I'm not sure it's right. What's the best case for the other side? That kind of thing.
Has your friendship and these conversations with John McWhorter, who, is different politically from you, has that changed has that changed any of your positions over time?
I don't know. I mean, he and I have a lot of common ground on the race issue. His most recent book is called Woke Racism, and it is a full-throated denunciation of the Ibram X. Kendi, Robin DiAngelo kind of, view of the, structural racism, white supremacy kind of, talk, and he gives chapter and verse to that effect, and he and I agree about that. So some of our ongoing conversation is articulating our respective views on those kinds of questions where we reinforce one another. On the other hand, I'm more conservative than he is, and, he knows it, and I know it. So when issues come up that we do conflict on, we can exhibit this practice of arguing and disagreeing, but nevertheless maintaining a kind of comity. Mm-hmm. But you asked me specifically, had my thinking about any substantive issue changed as a result of conversation with John, and I'm not sure I can identify. He hasn't convinced me of anything yet. We might get there.
Do you think he'll be disappointed by that?
I don't know. John was just honored by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, which is a organization, a very well-funded and well-staffed organization, promoting viewpoint diversity in higher education and trying to equip trustees and alumni of major academic institutions to be able to defend from their respective positions the goals of free speech and open inquiry, and so get universities to adopt the Chicago principles and so on. And John was honored as outstanding contributions to liberal arts education, and I was asked to give some remarks. And I did do, and I've put them up at the Substack for the world to see. And they are very laudatory and, very appreciative of a friendship, of a kind of, intellectual friendship that we've developed over a decade plus. So I have great respect and admiration for John. We have this rapport. I mean, it's kind of a shtick now. It's kind of an act that we perform every other week, and I look forward to it.
I'm sure he'd say the same laudatory things right back to you. This might sound like a dumb question, but why is race such an important issue for you? Why do you speak up about this?
I'm Black. I grew up in Chicago in the 1950s and 60s. Part of my self-understanding and my identity derived from my origins and that experience earlier in life. These communities of African Americans in the big cities that struggle with one or another issue are places that I know. It's these cultural and religious and other aspects resonate with me. If you ask me to define myself, I will inevitably find myself talking about my race and my identity as a Black American. Not only that, I mean, I'm many things, but that would be one of the things that I would call attention to. But your question is well put, well taken, because, there's an argument that, come on, I mean, grow up, get over it, let's get past it. I mean, I'm brown, you're Black, she's yellow, they're white. What the heck? That's superficial. There's nothing real deep there whatsoever. That's a kind of superstition, it's kind of belief in something that's not real. We should transcend it. I talk about it all the time at the podcast about growing beyond the kind of narrow confines of racial identity as the be-all and end-all. But the narrative and the history and the culture of African Americans is a real thing, and a sense of the meaning of life that finds some connection up to those things for an individual born as I was into that community is perfectly defensible. It seems to me there are other examples that one could give. You can think about Jewishness, or you could think about Irish or Italian ethnics, or religious, Catholics or something like that. And that would be a part of a person's identity, not the whole sum and substance of it, but certainly something worth affirming. And it's something like that.
And how do you feel these conversations have been going recently in America, race conversations?
Oh, I mean, we're in deep trouble. I think that I want to give one concrete example: the police and the maintenance of order and crime and police brutality. Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter. So here's what I think. What I think is that the character of the racial reckoning that summer of 2020, George Floyd, exposed the difficulty that we have in the country with dealing honestly and effectively with the problems of racial inequality and disparity. I mean, I think the fact that twice as many whites as blacks are killed by police every year is pertinent. I think that the idea that it's open season, this is what the attorney Ben Crump, who represents families of people who have been killed by police and does so very effectively. That's what he calls it in his book, open season. It's open season on black people. I think that's I'm not going to call it a lie. It's a hyperbolic exaggeration of the actual circumstance. I think if I want to talk about crime, punishment, violence in American cities, I don't want to see that conversation proceed in racial terms. I want to see it proceed in human terms. I think there's a huge downside to the racialization of that kind of conversation. I think the idea that the United States of America is a white supremacist, racist nation founded on slavery and genocide, that idea in the 21st century is wrong. I mean, profoundly wrong and unhelpful. And yet I can see the interests that are built up around framing America's serious problems in those terms flourishing, those interests. I mean, I said this. I had a piece in Quillette, Unspeakable Truths about Race in America. I said, what's going on with the family? How are black men and women interacting with each other and reproducing, and the children, and how they're being raised, and what's the structure of home life? And I say, 7 in 10 kids born to a black woman or a woman without a husband. And I say, this is a monumental social failure in the nature of our communal life. Things like that. I say, you look at the differences in the academic achievement and the cognitive functioning of these populations. I had Charles Murray on the show to talk about this. These are real things. I say, look at the violence. You think Black Lives Matter? Then, going from 10,000 to 20,000 homicides in a year ought to at least attract your attention. You ought to at least have something to say about that. That's an elephant in the room that you're going to ignore. Believe me, the rest of America can see it. They can see it in Chicago. They can see it in Philadelphia. They know what's going on. They don't go downtown at 10 o'clock at night. They're not willing to go into a restaurant and come out after a few drinks and stumble to their car after dark because they're afraid somebody's going to carjack them or somebody is going to rob them or worse, and so on. And I'm saying, you have nothing to say about that? And moreover, I think the political interests are to promote this sort of thing. Take the Georgia election integrity law that was passed into law. The president of the United States called it Jim Crow 2.0. Major League Baseball canceled their All-Star game in Atlanta to punish the state because the state was a racist bastion. All of that was simply false. It was false. It was in the Democrats' interest to frame it that way, but it was false. Okay, there's another side to this. Are the Republicans trying to make hay by pointing to crime and implicitly suggesting that there's a racial issue there? Yeah, that's going on. The well is being poisoned, I think. So I have great concerns about that. Yeah.
Do you lose friends over taking these positions?
Yeah. Although I don't have too many of those left to lose. 15 years ago, when I did my first podcast at Blogging Heads, it was, as I mentioned, after I'd given these lectures at Stanford, and my friend, the philosopher Josh Cohen, invited me on to talk about it. My lectures were called Race, Incarceration, and American Values, the Tanner Lectures, 2 lectures in 2007. And I was on fire with rage about the over-incarceration of black people in the country, about the huge footprint of the carceral state, prison industrial complex, school-to-prison pipeline, and so on. I was as far on the left on that issue as I could have ever imagined myself being. And I had friends who were saying, yeah, right on, right on. And I got invited to, repeat my denunciation of the mass incarceration and racially tinged thing. I got into a dispute with my longtime colleague, James Q. Wilson, now dead, that's very distinguished political scientist who was, author of The Broken Windows Policing Theory, and his book, Thinking About Crime, that's published in the 70s, had a big impact on the Reagan era, ratcheting up of, which was carried on after Reagan. Of course, Bill Clinton presided over continued increase in the numbers in prison and jails. We all know that. But Jim Wilson was a intellectual advocate on behalf of stricter law enforcement and so on. And I fell out with him. He died. I wrote an intellectual obituary that I wish I could take back. I basically said he died with blood on his hands because I was so angry about his continued support for a system that I thought had run amok. So I lost some friends on the right in that. But as the years have gone by, and as the situation that I've been hinting at here earlier in terms of the level of violence and disorder in inner city communities has become what it is, I've kind of changed my tune, and I'm not as much on the anti-prison bandwagon. I have a lot of sympathy for the kinds of ideas that people like Ralph Mangual, the fellow here at the Manhattan Institute, who's I've had on the show recently, talking about his book about why decarceration and depolicing is a bad idea. And I think he's closer to getting it right than wrong. And I'm worried about the victims of crime, not only about the way that we treat people who commit it and so on. So I've lost friends. That was the question. The question, have I lost friends? Yes, I've lost friends, but, and I've gained new friends.
Right. I mean, the positions you're taking right now, again, in certain circles, not the popular ones. And I'm wondering, to what extent does having a long career and having seen certain things come and go influence the way you think about something like, what's happened in the wake of the killing of George Floyd and the social and political culture and of these last few years and questions of white supremacy and race? Does it influence how you think about what stance to take, the arguments that you decide to go to the death on and the arguments you decide to let go, given what you've seen in the history?
Yeah, I guess it does. I guess it does. I mean, I think, so I've mentioned my lovely wife on a number of occasions because we have this ongoing debate in our home about political issues. And I'm able to say, look at what I said in 2007 about this, because if you say that I don't care, well, that's not true. I'm the same guy that said so. I use my archive, my personal archive of political activity and public intellectual work to support the view that I'm really much deeper and more complicated than the cartoon picture that you want to project me. Oh, you're just one of those people who thinks that, capitalism is great and you don't give a damn about the poor. Or you think every black person should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. No, I don't think that. My views are much more nuanced and rich and complicated than that. Look, I've, over the course of my life, taken this position, taken that position, and so on. And it's not a pendulum swinging back and forth. That's the wrong metaphor. I'm deepening and making more subtle and more nuanced the sensibilities that I bring to these questions. And I'm, we have this, at Substack, we have this feature that Nikita Petrov and Mark Sussman have helped me develop, called The Old Glenn and the New Glenn. So these are kind of face-offs where a 20-year-old video of me giving a lecture where I'm taking one position, and a 2-year-old video of me giving a lecture where I'm taking the opposite position, are put face-to-face with each other, and then I'm interviewed by my interlocutor, by Nikita or Mark, as to, okay, what's up with that? Which one of these guys has got it right? How do you do, whatever. I don't know how this all ends, and it does end. I'm painfully aware of the fact that we are all mortal, but I like to think that I'm on a higher plane today than I was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, warts and all. I like to think that I'm getting closer to the truth.
So looking back on your life, you're writing this memoir now.
Yeah.
Which I understand has been a work in progress for a while.
Yeah, I've been threatening to write this book for the better part of when I took a leave 2015-16. Now that's 7 years ago, from Brown University, and I went out to Stanford to the Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral and Social Sciences. Margaret Levy, who's just stepped down as the director, was kind enough to invite me, and I had a project description. And the project description was, I am going to be writing my memoir in which I reflect on my political journey and my personal life and so on and so on. And it was a great year. It was. I learned a lot from my colleagues there. I worked on it. I thought about it. I did various different things, but it didn't get written. And it hasn't yet been completed. But I'm happy to say that it is very far along, and my agent and my editor are very excited about the progress that has been made, and I'm pretty sure that the book is going to get over to the publisher in the next few months.
What's been difficult about writing it?
Well, you have to overcome being lazy. You have to figure out how you're going to tell the story. I don't have anything original to say about how difficult it is to actually produce as a writer. I talk with Mark Sussman about this all the time. He and I are kind of working together on it. We are more than kind of working together on it. He's helping me produce this book, and there's kind of what we call the yikes factor, which is when you actually pull the cover off and you look at the life. And it's not politics, this is life. Some of it is pretty ugly. Mm-hmm. That guy that abandoned his kid, or that betrayed his wife, or that was living a kind of life that is not dignified and respectable.
Mm-hmm. Is it tough to confront?
Yeah, it's tough to confront.
Some people might not know this about you, that for a while, and while a very successful academic, were you at Harvard at some?
Yeah, I was at Harvard.
You're leading a double life, and you're on the sort of...
I was a cocaine addict and stuff like that. I had a mistress stashed away that it blew up in my face when we got into a fight that became public, and she accused me of battery, which was not what happened, but this was 35 years ago. So since I'm not running for the Senate, 35-year-old conflicts with women probably not as relevant. But in any case, yeah, I was this bad boy with a nightlife and a kind of reckless disregard for the normal constraints. Thought I was Superman. I thought I was the baddest cat on the block.
You just thought you could do that. You could be the academic at Harvard. You could be the night's cat.
Yeah, I thought, and I did do it until it blew up in my face. And then I found myself with a serious cocaine problem, and there was inpatient treatment, and there was halfway houses, and there was relapses, and I eventually got religion, literally, and stood on my 2 feet, put my marriage back together. We had 2 children subsequently who are now in their 30s. This was 3 decades ago. But yeah, I went through the valley of the shadow of death, came out on the other side.
Did you think it was something that you were going to be able to recover from?
Well, there was a while there where I didn't. Then there was a time when I didn't know. So one day at a time is what they teach in the recovery world. And it's true. You just got to get through today without drinking. I knew that I could do that. I knew I didn't have to drink. And of course, I'm not talking about alcohol. I'm talking about crack, cocaine. But I knew I didn't have to use today. And, you know, put enough of those days together and you got a year. Put enough of that together, you got 5 years. You don't have to use. Your life is better. So I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity.
So in writing memoirs, one of the things that people have done it say, or actually critics say this, there's a tendency to either over-glorify the self or undersell the self, to be too modest or to be too immodest. And so how are you trying to walk the line?
For me, it's very obvious that you must disclose discrediting information about yourself in order to win the confidence of the reader, such that when you get to the part where you want to glorify yourself, you have the reader's credibility. So even if my goal is to toot my own horn, at the end of the day, when they turn the last page of the book, and I want them to think, Glenn is really a wonderful guy. What a human being. What a life. To get there, we have to go through the valley of the shadow of death. We got to, I had a friend, the late Anthony Campbell was his name. He's a preacher and a professor of religion at Boston University. He's dead. He's been dead for a while. But he used to tell me about sermons, about when the black preacher is in the Baptist church and he's up there in the well and he's trying to get the audience to shout the hallelujah and he's trying to get them to see the glory of God and whatnot. There's got to be some funk on it. It's got to get ugly. You got to show the power of God in this case, in this example, to resurrect. He ain't resurrecting unless you're already dead. You got to go there, whether it's about sex or it's about alcohol or it's about pride or it's about greed or it's about cowardliness or whatever. You got to go there. You got to show them. And I think that's true here. I think maybe you can go too far one way or the other. Maybe you can be from page 1 to the end tooting your own horn all the time, or maybe from page 1 to the end, it's always in the valley. It's always in the valley. And neither of those, I think, is quite right. But there is credibility to be had from the disclosure of discrediting information. And I think that that's an interesting and ironic, I gain credibility by showing myself to be not especially
pure.
Yeah, not a pure and good guy in every respect. Because that's true about everybody, isn't it?
Well, except for me, I'm perfect. I'll never do anything wrong.
Except for Hamish.
Thank you. Is this going to be the last book you write?
No, I don't think so. But I don't know what the next book is. Actually, I'm kind of easing myself into retirement, and maybe I'll take a crack at fiction. I don't know. But let's get this one done. Then we can talk about the next one.
Excellent. Very good. And just to finish off here, you've mentioned Bob Wright, you've mentioned Matt Taibbi, you've mentioned Nikita Petrov. These are all writers on Substack.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, and John McWhorter.
And Emily Austin.
Emily Austin, yeah, it's been a good show.
I like Barry Weiss, too. We're buddies.
Oh, right, yes. And I heard she did a very good interview with you for her podcast.
She did, yeah.
Are there any other Substack writers that you read and you'd recommend to your people?
Well, I read Taibbi, and I read Andrew Sullivan. I read Alex Berenson, everybody.
Why do you read Alex Berenson?
Well, because it's entertaining. I mean, and because this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated. This is the president of the United States. really pissed me off. And because I'm married to the lovely LaJuan, and she deeply distrusts the pharmaceutical industry and this whole vax stuff. She has got to be able to certify that she has been vaccinated if she wants to travel, as we did recently, to St. Martin for a lovely time in the sun and all of that. But she has, in a way, educated me about a lot of the issues. And so I understand that Berenson is,
the Atlantic called him the wrongest man about the pandemic or something like that.
And I have, heard him denounced from every possible quarter. I'm a non-paying subscriber. The emails come to my inbox, and I find myself reading them, and he's not always wrong.
Is there something about you that sort of wants you to be open to views that the official narrative has denounced as a way to sort of fight back?
Okay, so that's one of these discrediting things about self that I'm going to have to deal with. I call myself a contrarian. I say I don't like bandwagons. Am I being a contrarian for contrarian's sake? Am I, refusing to acknowledge things that are true simply because most people think them to be true and I have to therefore be on the other side? Do I get a certain amount of self-aggrandizement and satisfaction from sneering at the popular opinion and taking the slings and arrows that come from that? Probably, yeah.
So it's fun and difficult.
Yeah, but at least I'm aware of this tick.
Well, Glenn, thank you very much for joining me on this conversation. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thanks for publishing on Substack, and thanks for all the works that you've brought into the world.
Thank you for Substack. It's a wonderful platform. I know this is not supposed to be a commercial for Substack, but it's changed my life. I am now a publisher. I have a voice that reaches tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. I've created a community of people who are interested in what I have to say. I have contributors who send in interesting pieces, which I can then show to my followers at Substack. So I'm very, very happy with my association with your enterprise.
That means a lot. Thank you very much for saying that.
You're welcome.